he crossed the roof of the world. With fire in his heart and Rome in his sights, he didn't just wage war. He redefined it. This is not just history. This is legend. They said no man could cross the Alps in winter, but they had never faced a man raised on vengeance. Years before, a boy stood on the blood-soaked shores of Sicily, watching his father's army crumble beneath the legions of Rome. He asked why the gods had allowed such defeat. His father gave no answer, only a command. Swear. Swear you will never be Rome's friend. That boy became Hannibal. He did not swear with words, but with a life of fury. As Rome expanded east and west, Carthage simmered in silence. In their markets, salt was traded. In their temples, incense burned. But beneath it all, plans were drawn, armies trained, and one man sharpened his wrath like a blade waiting to strike. He would not attack from the sea. He would not knock on Rome's gates like a diplomat. He would break in from the roof of the world. With elephants and men, he would march across frozen mountains, through storms that buried soldiers alive, across rivers that swallowed legions whole. Not because it was possible, but because it was impossible, and because Rome would never expect it. This is not the story of a battle. It is the story of a promise, made in blood, kept in fire. And this is only the beginning. By the end of the 3rd century BC, the ancient Mediterranean world belonged to two powers, locked in orbit, drawn to collision. To the west, Rome, an iron-fisted republic of farmers turned conquerors, hardened by generations of relentless warfare. To the south, Carthage, a mercantile empire built on silver, ships, and the cunning of Phoenician blood. Its heart beating not in the Senate, but in the counting rooms of its merchant princes. They had once been allies, but the First Punic War had changed everything. 20 years earlier, Rome and Carthage had clashed over Sicily, an island that dangled between their ambitions like bait. For 23 years, they bled each other dry. Rome, new to naval warfare, built fleet after fleet from nothing, losing entire squadrons to storms, only to return with more. Carthage, dominant at sea, underestimated the sheer will of its land-born rival. In 241 BC, Carthage fell, its navy shattered, its treasury emptied, its pride humiliated. Rome demanded reparations. Carthage paid. But the cost was more than silver. It was the death of an illusion that Carthage could coexist with Rome in peace. And Rome? It had tasted empire and found it sweet. Over the next 2 decades, Rome expanded ruthlessly, conquering Gaulish tribes in the north, Greek cities in the south, and Corsica and Sardinia in the west. Even when Carthage was too weak to resist, Rome seized Carthaginian holdings, citing technicalities in the treaty. Every insult carved deeper into the Carthaginian soul. But Carthage wasn't dead. Far from it. In the ashes of defeat, a new Carthaginian hope emerged, not in the old city, but in Hispania, modern-day Spain. There, a general named Hannibal Barca carved out a new empire with Carthaginian steel and Iberian blood. He rebuilt what had been lost, not in the Mediterranean, but on the edge of the known world. And with him rode a boy, his son Hannibal. Hannibal watched his father win impossible battles. He saw tribes bow to their banner, gold flow through their camps, and Roman influence pushed back inch by inch. In Hannibal's eyes, Hispania was not a new land. It was the anvil where vengeance would be forged. When Hamilcar died, his mantle passed to his son-in-law, Hasdrubal, and when Hasdrubal was assassinated, it fell to Hannibal. He was 26. By then, the Romans were already uneasy. They saw Carthage rising again, not with ships, but with soldiers. They warned Hannibal, "Do not cross the Ebro River in Hispania." The Ebro was more than a river. It was a line in the sand. Rome had drawn it and dared Carthage to cross. Hannibal did more than cross it. He stormed beyond it. He laid siege to Saguntum, a city Rome claimed as a friend and ally. Carthage had never signed such a pact, but Rome insisted. When Saguntum fell in 219 BC, Rome demanded Carthage hand Hannibal over for punishment. Carthage refused. And so the stage was set, not just for another war, but for a reckoning. One fought across continents, one led by a general who would do the unthinkable, one that would bring the Republic of Rome to the very edge of destruction. The Second Punic War was not a war for territory. It was a war for survival. In the spring of 218 BC, a Roman envoy stood in the heart of Carthage, his face carved with the cold confidence of empire. He raised the folds of his toga and said to the Carthaginian Senate, "Here I carry peace, and here I carry war. Choose." The Carthaginians answered with silence. Rome had already chosen for them. But the war had not begun in the halls of diplomacy. It had begun months earlier in the mind of a young commander with his eyes fixed on Italy. Hannibal Barca knew the rules of war. He knew how Carthage had lost the last one, by fighting it on Rome's terms, on Roman soil, in Roman waters. He would not make the same mistake. He would bring the war to them. The decision was madness. Every advisor told him so. Rome controlled the seas. The Alps were a frozen wall, guarded by hostile tribes. Crossing them with an army, infantry, cavalry, baggage, war elephants was not just suicidal, it was unthinkable. But Hannibal was not like other generals. He didn't seek battle, he sought legend. He left New Carthage, modern Cartagena, with 90,000 infantry, 12,000 cavalry, and 37 war elephants. He marched north through Iberia, fighting hostile tribes, losing men, gathering allies. Each step took him closer to the Pyrenees, and then to Gaul, where more enemies waited, but also more gold and more revenge. The Roman Senate was slow to understand. They assumed Hannibal would stay in Hispania. They sent one consul, Publius Cornelius Scipio, to intercept him there. But by the time Scipio arrived, Hannibal was already gone, vanished into the mountains. What followed was one of the greatest military gambles in history. In October 218 BC, Hannibal reached the Alps. The weather turned cruel. Freezing winds howled down white slopes. Mules slipped and fell into gorges. Men starved. The elephants, symbols of Carthaginian might, collapsed one by one. Every footstep was pain. Every pass was blood. The mountains themselves seemed to reject him. He lost half his army in the crossing. And yet, 2 weeks later, Hannibal emerged in northern Italy, broken but alive, beaten but still dangerous. He had done the impossible. He had walked across the roof of the world and descended into the Roman heartland. No army had ever done it before. None ever would again. Panic swept through Rome. Their enemies were supposed to arrive by sea, predictable, containable. But this was a ghost army descending from the sky, led by a man whose name they barely knew. And then, almost casually, Hannibal announced his arrival by ambushing and destroying a Roman cavalry force at the Ticinus River. 1 month later, he did it again at the Trebia River, this time annihilating a full Roman army. 2 battles, 2 defeats. Rome was stunned. This was no ordinary war. This was a vendetta, a reckoning carved in snow, blood, and the burning embers of Saguntum. And Hannibal was just getting started. Rome had never known fear. Hannibal taught there the taste of it. History seldom grants us the luxury of clarity in the moment. It is only in hindsight that we discern the slow, methodical unraveling of an empire's certainties. Such was the case in the years that followed Hannibal's miraculous descent from the Alps. From 218 to 216 BC, Italy became a crucible of war. Its rivers dyed with blood, its fields sown with ash, its people acquainted daily with despair. The Trebia, where winter first burned the Roman Republic, stunned by the boldness of Hannibal's arrival, rushed to assemble a response. Consul Tiberius Sempronius Longus, hungry for glory, took the bait. In the bitter cold of December 218 BC, he led a full Roman army across the icy waters of the Trebia River, straight into Hannibal's trap. What followed was a textbook ambush. Wet, cold, hungry, the Romans fought with the valor of tradition, but Hannibal fought with the clarity of vision. His Numidian cavalry encircled them, while hidden troops sprang from the underbrush like spirits summoned by vengeance. By the day's end, the Roman army had been broken, routed, scattered like dry leaves. It was the first taste of what Hannibal would come to perfect. The Apennine March, through the bones of Italy. But what confounded Rome most was not just the military genius of Hannibal. It was his refusal to act like a barbarian. He did not sack cities indiscriminately, nor did he claim lands for Carthage. He marched with discipline, often sparing locals, and even releasing prisoners to show Carthaginian magnanimity. What he wanted was not territory. It was something more elusive, Rome's soul. He moved southward, weaving through the Apennines, shadowed always by Roman armies too cautious to engage. It was here that he orchestrated another horror at Lake Trasimene. In June 217 BC, in the early morning fog, Hannibal lured the forces of Consul Gaius Flaminius into a narrow pass. The mists clung to the water like shrouds. Silence reigned, and then, without warning, death came from 3 sides. It was not a battle, it was a slaughter. 15,000 Romans died in hours. Flaminius himself was hacked down and vanished beneath the crimson tide. Rome trembled. Never in their history had she lost so much, so quickly, so completely. Fabius the Delayer, wisdom against fire. In desperation, the Senate turned to a man older than fear, Quintus Fabius Maximus. He was no warrior hero, but a man of endurance, of patience, of survival. He introduced a strategy that would come to define asymmetrical warfare for generations. Delay, no pitched battles, no sudden charges, just shadow, attrition, starvation. The Romans mocked him. They called him Cunctator, the Delayer. But it worked. Hannibal grew frustrated, his army restless. Italy began to feel less like a blade and more like a trap. And yet, even in this stalemate, Hannibal found ways to astonish. In one night near the Apulian Mountains, trapped in a narrow gorge, he affixed torches to the horns of hundreds of cattle and drove them across the heights. The Romans, fooled into chasing ghost fires, abandoned their post, and Hannibal slipped away. It was not just war, it was theater. The geometry of annihilation. Then came Cannae. The geometry of annihilation in August of 216 BC, Hannibal delivered the single most devastating defeat in Roman military history. The Romans under consuls Lucius Aemilius Paulus and Gaius Terentius Varro fielded a massive army, perhaps 80,000 men. Confident that sheer numbers would suffice, they arranged themselves in dense column-like formations and charged. Hannibal had been waiting for this. He positioned his army in a subtle crescent, vulnerable at the center, strong at the flanks. As the Roman legions surged forward, they were slowly swallowed. The Carthaginian center bent, not broke. The wings closed inward like a great iron jaw. And behind them, Hannibal's cavalry, victorious on the flanks, circled back, closing the trap. The encirclement was perfect. By day's end, the fields were carpeted with corpses, perhaps 50,000, maybe more. Roman blood turned the soil black. Senators wept openly in the forum. There were no longer enough men to bury the dead. Never had Rome come so close to oblivion. In the wake of Cannae, the Republic did not collapse, but it wavered. Allies defected. Capua, the second city of Italy, joined Hannibal. Macedonia began plotting. And within Rome, despair turned to superstition. Human sacrifices, long forbidden, were secretly conducted beneath the city. Yet Hannibal did not march on Rome. It remains one of history's most debated decisions. Did he hope Rome would fall by defection, not force? Or did he simply understand that sacking a city is not the same as conquering its will? Whatever the answer, the moment passed. Rome regrouped. Hannibal lingered in Italy for years, but the tide had begun to turn. Still, for a time, he had made the eternal city bleed. Two titans of history met across a dusty plain in Africa. Only one would shape the future. By 202 BC, the long shadow Hannibal had cast over Italy began to dissolve into twilight. His genius, once unstoppable, was now a stranded relic. For over 15 years, he had ravaged Roman lands, toppled consular legions, outwitted every general sent against him. But Rome, unyielding, brutal in her resilience, had endured. And now she turned her vengeance toward Carthage itself. Scipio, the mirror of Hannibal. It is a peculiar irony of history that the man destined to destroy Hannibal had once been a boy who survived Cannae. Publius Cornelius Scipio, charismatic, visionary, unshackled by Roman orthodoxy, had risen swiftly through the ranks, not by patronage, but by daring. He had wrested Spain from Carthaginian hands, broken their alliances, and earned the loyalty of his soldiers with a brilliance Rome had not seen since Alexander. But Scipio was more than a soldier. He was a student of Hannibal himself. Where other Romans had feared the Carthaginian, Scipio studied him, admired him, learned from him, and in time he would defeat him by becoming his equal. In 204 BC, Scipio crossed into North Africa, not with brute legions but with fire and nerve. He struck at Carthage's doorstep, forcing Hannibal to return from Italy. After 16 years, the predator was summoned home. The plain of Zama, Africa's final judgment. The morning of the battle dawned with the sky blistered by sun, and the wind carrying the scent of dust and prophecy. At Zama, near the edge of Carthaginian territory, the two greatest generals of their age finally faced one another. It was not merely a clash of armies. It was a collision of philosophies, of destinies, of civilizations. Hannibal, now older, bore not only the weight of war, but the ghosts of lost opportunities. His army was a patchwork: Numidian cavalry, Carthaginian citizens, and raw African levies. Gone were the veterans of Italy. Gone, too, was certainty. Scipio, by contrast, stood at the height of confidence. He had Numidian cavalry under the brilliant Masnissa. He had well-drilled legions forged through Iberian campaigns, and he had studied Hannibal's tactics intimately. The battle unfolds. Hannibal opened with his war elephants, over 80 of them thundering forward in a charge meant to terrify and disrupt. But Scipio was ready. Trumpeters blasted horns and staggered volleys. Soldiers opened lanes in their ranks. The beasts panicked, veered, and turned back, some crashing into Hannibal's own lines. Then came the infantry, wave upon wave of Carthaginian troops clashing with Roman discipline. For hours, the line surged and bent, neither breaking. Hannibal had placed his best men in the third and final line. His last hope, a coiled spring of skill and wrath. But Scipio adapted again. He reorganized his lines mid-battle, a maneuver so complex it bordered on madness. The Roman legions, now reformed, met Hannibal's veterans in a final, grinding confrontation. And then Massinissa struck. The Numidian cavalry returned from routing Hannibal's horsemen and smashed into the Carthaginian rear. Surrounded, pressed from all sides, Hannibal's line finally broke. The battle was over. The war was lost. Carthage would never rise again. Aftermath. The end of a world. Hannibal survived, but as a man unmoored from history. He had fought with honor, brilliance, and defiance. But Rome had become something more than an enemy. It had become inevitable. At Zama, Carthage lost more than a battle. It lost its destiny. The treaty that followed stripped it of empire, fleet, and pride. Hannibal, once the master of Italy, would spend his final years wandering, advising foreign kings, evading Roman assassins. A ghost of greatness. Scipio returned to Rome a hero, but with a quiet melancholy. He knew what he had destroyed. Perhaps he even grieved it. For in defeating Hannibal, he had not merely saved the Republic, he had closed the door on an alternate world. Rome had won, but the shadow of Hannibal lingered in the Roman mind like a curse spoken in a dying breath. The battlefield of Zama was quiet. The dust had settled. The dead lay in silent testimony to the clash of two worlds, and though Rome had triumphed, her most dangerous enemy lived on, not as a general, but as a symbol. The war was over, but its trauma had just begun to echo. A broken Carthage. The terms imposed by Rome after Zama were designed not only to cripple Carthage, but to erase her future. No army without Roman permission, no elephants, no foreign wars, and a staggering indemnity of 10,000 talents of silver, enough to sap generations of Carthaginian labor. Yet the most lasting blow was psychological. Carthage had once been a titan of trade, invention, and defiant strength. Now it was a city forbidden to defend itself, its power castrated in law and custom. Hannibal had returned not as a savior, but as a relic of what might have been. For a brief time, he tried to rebuild, reforming Carthage's institutions with characteristic brilliance. But Rome, ever vigilant, viewed his competence as threat enough. Under pressure, Hannibal fled east into exile, a wandering figure moving between courts, still feared, still hunted. His death by poison in a foreign land was quiet, but his legend was anything but. Hannibal in the Roman imagination. To understand the Roman psyche in the wake of the Second Punic War, one must not look to monuments or treaties, but to fear. Hannibal had not merely invaded Italy, he had occupied the Roman soul. For decades, parents would hush their children with the whisper, "Hannibal ad portas." Hannibal is at the gates. This was no longer a man. It was a specter. Even after his death, the Roman Senate debated his whereabouts, as if the ghost of Hannibal might at any moment return on the wind. Roman historians, from Livy to Cicero, returned to him again and again, not merely to recount facts, but to process trauma. Hannibal became Rome's necessary villain, the crucible through which her identity was forged. And yet, there was admiration, quiet, grudging, undeniable. Scipio Africanus, the man who had defeated him, once said, "Of all generals, Hannibal is the greatest. Had he possessed Rome's resources, he would have conquered the world." It was a haunting compliment, and one that revealed an uncomfortable truth. Rome did not win because she was more brilliant. She won because she endured. The road to Cato, though Zama ended the war, it did not end the anxiety. Carthage, even broken, still stood. She paid her debts. She honored Rome's conditions. But that too was a problem. A humbled Carthage that obeyed too well could one day rise again. The Roman statesman, Cato the Elder, understood this. Every speech he gave in the Senate, regardless of topic, ended with the chilling refrain, "Carthago delenda est." Carthage must be destroyed. Here lies the cruel irony of victory. Rome had slain her rival, yet could not sleep while she lived. Thus began the slow march toward a final reckoning. Decades later, Rome would return, not to punish Carthage for rebellion, but for mere existence. In 146 BC, during the Third Punic War, Roman soldiers burned the city to the ground. Survivors were sold into slavery. Fields were salted. Memory was silenced, but not entirely. The Echo Hannibal was dead. Carthage was dust, and yet the echo remained. In every Roman triumph, in every border pushed outward, there was a flicker of memory. A boy on an altar in Carthage, swearing eternal hatred of Rome. A ghost riding an elephant through the Alps. A genius who showed the Republic what fear truly meant. And perhaps, in some corner of the Roman mind, that echo whispered still. With Carthage humbled, Rome expanded with newfound confidence. Spain, Greece, and the Eastern kingdoms would soon fall into their orbit. Legions once forged in desperation now marched with purpose to bring Roman order to a chaotic world. But the memory of Hannibal never faded, and Carthage, though crippled, still existed. In the minds of men like Cato the Elder, that alone was intolerable. The seeds of another war were quietly being sown, one that would end not with negotiation, but with fire and annihilation. Rome had won the Second Punic War, but the third was coming. If Hannibal's war has left you breathless, imagine what happens when Carthage is finally destroyed.